Hello everyone. Have you ever picked up your phone and felt just for a moment that something was not quite right? Tonight, we are stepping into one of the strangest corners of modern mysteries, a place where technology and the unknown quietly intersect. Welcome back, everyone. And if you are anything like me, carrying a mind full of curiosity, then settle in because today's story begins with a simple question. What would you do if your phone rang from a number that should not be able to call you at all? Most of us trust our devices. We expect them to behave in predictable ways. A call comes in, a name appears, a voice on the other end explains why they are reaching out. But every so often, people around the world report something that breaks those expectations entirely: a call from a number that has been turned off, disconnected, deactivated, or sometimes even destroyed. Imagine this: your friend's phone has run out of battery, or maybe you know for sure it is lying on the table right in front of you, powered off. And yet, suddenly your device lights up, flashing their name. You answer, confused. Sometimes there is static. Sometimes there is a voice that sounds familiar but distant. Sometimes the line goes quiet the moment you speak. When you call back, the phone is still off or the number no longer exists. It is as if the call appeared out of thin air and vanished just as quickly. In many cases, phone companies can't trace these calls. The logs show nothing. No record of an incoming connection. No timestamp. It is like the call slipped through some hidden space, bypassing every normal step that should make a call possible. People often describe these moments as unsettling, not because something frightening happens, but because they challenge the everyday rules we rely on. And perhaps the most intriguing part is that these stories come from everywhere: different countries, different cultures, different decades. The details change, but the pattern remains: a call from a device that should not be able to call. A voice that should not be reachable. A moment that leaves the receiver wondering whether technology glitched, or whether something far stranger reached out for a brief second. Whatever the cause, these moments remind us that even in our modern world, filled with circuits and signals, there are still corners where the unexplained finds a way to speak. Building on the unsettling nature of mysterious calls, the second layer of this phenomenon brings us into even stranger territory: moments when the caller is not just unreachable but no longer alive. Across countless accounts, people describe receiving a phone call from someone they love. A parent, a partner, a close friend. The voice sounds familiar, steady, and unmistakably theirs. Yet later, the recipient learns that the caller had already passed away before the call was ever made. Imagine answering your phone and hearing the voice of someone whose loss you are still processing. They might say your name. They might deliver a short message, sometimes comforting, sometimes cryptic, sometimes just a simple goodbye. In other cases, the voice is faint, distorted by static, as if it is coming from an impossible distance. And then the line goes silent. What makes these reports even more striking is that the timelines rarely match. Loved ones often learn after receiving the call that the person had already passed, sometimes hours before, sometimes days. This creates a moment of emotional shock. The realization that you spoke to someone at a time when a call should have been impossible. Phone records usually offer no explanation. There is no trace of the call. No incoming number. No voice message saved. It is as if the moment existed only between two people and vanished immediately afterward. Some people interpret these experiences as a final farewell, a last attempt to reach out, to reassure, or to send one final message. Others see it as a psychological response during grief. But no matter the explanation, these stories share the same core: the uncanny sense that even after someone leaves this world, the connection between two hearts might try to bridge the gap one last time. As if calls from someone who has passed were not mysterious enough, there is a rarer and far more puzzling variation. Moments when the call comes before the news of the person's death, yet later the timeline reveals that the caller had already passed away before the phone ever rang. These stories usually begin in a completely ordinary way. Someone's phone rings, often at a time when they are not expecting anything unusual. The caller ID shows a familiar name, a sibling, a close friend, a coworker. The voice on the line sounds normal, calm, and entirely consistent with who they know. Sometimes the caller says just one sentence. Sometimes they ask a simple question or mention something routine like confirming a plan or reminding the person about something trivial. There is nothing in the conversation that feels strange at that moment. But later, everything shifts. Hours afterward, or sometimes even just minutes, the recipient receives news. The caller had already passed away before the time of the call. In several accounts, the death occurred earlier than the moment the phone rang, sometimes by a significant margin. This leaves behind a moment that simply does not fit into the physical timeline. The call happened after the person's life had already ended. What makes these cases so compelling is their emotional clarity. People often insist they know the caller's voice perfectly. They remember the tone, the pauses, the rhythm of how that person speaks. And yet, the official record does not align. The time of death does not match the time of the call. Phone companies usually report no record of the incoming call at all, no data trail, no digital footprint, nothing for the system to analyze. Some view these moments as a type of crisis communication, a final spark reaching out in the moment of transition. Others believe it reflects how strong emotional bonds might create a bridge that defies our usual understanding of time. But regardless of the explanation, these stories share a haunting detail, a connection made at a moment when communication should not have been possible. This idea deepens the emotional impact of the phenomenon by focusing on the moment of discovery, that unsettling point where everything that once felt normal suddenly becomes inexplicable. The person receives a call, picks it up, and has what seems to be an ordinary conversation. At that moment, nothing feels strange. The voice on the other end sounds exactly as it should, familiar, grounded, and totally alive. The content of the conversation is usually simple, sometimes even mundane, asking if someone has eaten, reminding them about an errand, or just saying they will talk again soon. But later, the truth arrives, often through a family member, a neighbor, or a sudden urgent message. The caller had already passed away before the time of the call. Sometimes the difference is minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes more. This creates a painful shift in perception. What once felt normal now becomes a moment suspended outside all known rules. Many people describe this discovery as the most haunting part. It is not the call itself that frightens them, because during the call, everything feels completely ordinary. It is the realization afterward that turns the memory into something strange. They replay the conversation in their minds, wondering if the voice sounded distant or if something about the tone hinted at a farewell. Some people say they recognized later that the voice felt soft, far away, or calm in an unusual way. Others say nothing at all seemed different, the moment only became mysterious in hindsight. Phone records rarely provide answers. Often there is no trace of the call, no line connection, no logged activity. Telecommunications systems treat the call as if it never happened. This lack of evidence only deepens the confusion. The person receiving the call is left holding a memory that the system denies ever occurred. For some, these moments bring comfort, a final connection they did not know they needed. For others, it becomes a lingering question they carry for years. Whether seen as coincidence, unexplained signal error, or something beyond our current understanding, these calls blur the line between presence and absence in a way few experiences can. One of the most striking parts of these reports is how ordinary the calls feel in the moment. Unlike scenes from horror movies or dramatic folklore, the voice on the other end is rarely distorted, frightening, or unnatural. Instead, people often describe the caller's voice as calm, steady, and exactly the way they remember it. The tone matches perfectly the small pauses, the familiar phrasing, even the emotional warmth. Everything feels real, grounded, and completely in character. Picture this: your phone rings and your loved one's name appears on the screen. You pick up, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. The person greets you in their usual way. Maybe they ask if you are busy. Maybe they remind you about something you talked about earlier. Or maybe it is just a short check-in lasting only a few seconds. During that call, you do not feel anything unusual, no static, no distortion, no strange coldness in the voice. It sounds exactly like them on any other day. And that is precisely what makes these experiences so unsettling afterward. When the news of their passing arrives later, the memory of the call transforms completely. People replay the moment in their minds, trying to find something unusual they may have missed. But in most stories, nothing stands out. The voice was natural. The content was ordinary. The tone was peaceful. There was no hint that anything was wrong. In some accounts, the caller even seems unusually composed, almost serene, but not in a way that raises alarm during the moment itself. Instead, it is only later that the recipient realizes how odd that calmness might have been. But for the majority, the call feels like a simple, everyday interaction, indistinguishable from any other conversation they might have had with that person. This normality is what gives these stories their emotional weight. These are not dramatic or chaotic moments, they are quiet, intimate fragments of connection that feel real until time proves otherwise. It raises a haunting question: how can something so ordinary happen at a moment when it should be impossible? If the voice on the other end feels strangely normal, the phone logs often feel disturbingly empty. One of the most commonly reported patterns in these cases is the complete absence of digital evidence. After the call ends, people naturally check their phone history, partly out of curiosity, partly to reassure themselves that the moment was real. But what they find instead is unsettling. There is no record of the call at all. No incoming number. No timestamp. No missed call. No duration. Nothing. It is as if the phone never rang. For some, this discovery happens immediately. They look at the screen, expecting to see the entry, only to find a blank space where the call should be. Others do not check until much later, hours or even days afterward, and the absence hits just as hard. In both cases, the digital silence contradicts their lived experience. They heard the ringtone. They answered the call. They spoke to someone. Yet their device insists that none of it occurred. When people contact phone companies for clarification, the mystery deepens. Customer service records typically show no trace of any connection at the time in question. No routing data. No signal logs. No communications traffic that would indicate a real call passed through the network. The system treats the moment as non-existent. This discrepancy between memory and data is what many find hardest to explain. Technology is supposed to be precise. Calls should leave digital footprints. Even spam calls and accidental dials generate logs. So when a call feels real but leaves no trace, it creates a sense of unreality that lingers. Some attribute the missing logs to technical glitches, unusual network behavior, or rare routing anomalies. Others see it as part of the mystery, evidence that these moments fall outside the boundaries of normal communication. But regardless of the explanation, the emptiness of the phone log becomes a quiet, lingering reminder of something that should not have happened, yet somehow did. To understand these mysterious calls more fully, we have to look at an older and broader category of human experiences known as crisis apparitions. Long before mobile phones existed, people reported moments where a loved one who was far away, sometimes hundreds of kilometers, seemed to reach out at the moment of their passing. Not physically, but through a vivid impression, a voice calling their name, a sudden image in their mind, a knock on the door, or a feeling so strong it is impossible to ignore. When we place the phone calls from the dead phenomenon in this context, the pattern becomes even more intriguing. Instead of appearing in dreams or visions, the communication in these modern cases uses the very device we rely on every day, the phone. It becomes the medium through which a final message seems to travel, intentionally or not. Many reports describe the timing of these calls as eerily precise. The phone rings within minutes of the person's passing, or at the exact hour when something life-changing occurred. In some cases, the call aligns so closely with the documented time of death that the recipient later feels as though they had witnessed a kind of farewell, a moment of connection that bypassed physical limitations. This does not mean the call necessarily contains a clear message. Often, the communication is minimal, a single word, a soft greeting, or even silence. Yet recipients commonly describe a powerful emotional impression, a sense that the caller wanted to reach out one last time. Researchers who study human experiences of grief and trauma point out that crisis apparitions typically happen during intense emotional bonds. It is not random. It is personal. And that emotional connection seems to be present in these mysterious phone calls as well. In this way, the phenomenon sits at the intersection of ancient human experience and modern technology. It blends timeless stories of final goodbyes with the devices we use today, suggesting that even as the world changes, the deepest forms of connection might find their own paths to reach us. When people try to make sense of these impossible calls, the explanations tend to fall into three broad categories. Each one reflects a different way of understanding the world: scientific, psychological, and speculative. And none of them fully answers every case. The first category involves technical or electrical anomalies. Some believe these events might stem from rare glitches in telecommunication networks, strange routing errors, ghost signals bouncing through old towers, or leftover data packets crossing lines at unexpected moments. Mobile networks are complex, and under certain conditions, outdated or corrupted data can surface briefly. However, this explanation falls apart when the caller's phone is powered off, destroyed, or disconnected from service entirely, making a real call impossible. It also does not explain conversations that sound clear, intentional, and personal. The second explanation involves psychological coincidence. Human memory and emotion are powerful forces, especially during times of stress or grief. Some theorists suggest that people may misremember the time of the call, or that they might assign meaning to an unrelated phone event after learning about the loss. But this does not account for cases where multiple people heard the same voice, or where call records briefly appeared and then vanished, or where the timing aligns with a confirmed moment of passing. The third explanation steps into the realm of the unknown. To some, these calls resemble modern versions of age-old stories, final messages delivered in a moment of transition. These interpretations do not claim to break physical laws. They simply acknowledge that there are aspects of human experience we have not fully mapped. Whether viewed as symbolic, spiritual, or as a form of connection that travels beyond ordinary limits, these explanations try to honor the emotional reality of the moment. None of these theories cover everything. Each leaves gaps. Each raises new questions. And maybe that is why the phenomenon remains so compelling. It sits exactly where science, emotion, and mystery meet, asking us to consider that the world might be more layered than we think. Another striking feature shared across countless reports is the shortness of these calls. They rarely unfold into full conversations. Instead, they appear and disappear like small, fragile moments that slip through the cracks of time. Most people say the call lasted only seconds. A quick ringtone, a familiar name on the screen, and then a voice, soft, distant, or perfectly normal, delivering a message that feels strangely compressed. Sometimes it is a simple greeting. Sometimes it is the person calling your name. Sometimes it is a short phrase like "I am okay, do not worry," or "talk later." And in the most haunting cases, the voice says nothing at all. Just silence. But a silence that feels intentional, heavy, and filled with meaning. What makes these brief moments memorable is the emotional weight they carry. Even a 2-second whisper can stay in someone's mind for years, especially when they later learn that the caller was no longer alive at the time. The shortness of the call often magnifies the mystery, as if whatever force or connection enabled that moment could only hold open for a tiny window before slipping away. Some people report that the call ended abruptly, almost as if the line was cut from the other side. Others say the call faded out, the voice dissolving into static or soft background noise before the connection collapsed. A few hear breathing. A few hear nothing. But nearly everyone emphasizes the same detail: the call was fleeting, like a message carried on a fragile thread that could not last. The brevity also fuels debate about the origin of these calls. In technical explanations, short calls could point to glitches, signal echoes, or accidental pings. In psychological interpretations, a brief sensory impression might align with moments of emotional shock or intuition. And in more mysterious viewpoints, a short call might be all that a final connection can manage, a last attempt to reach across a boundary we do not yet understand. Whether comforting or unsettling, these short calls leave behind questions that linger long after the moment ends. As more stories surface from different countries and generations, These unusual phone calls have slowly taken on a life of their own, becoming a blend of lived experience, cultural storytelling, and the deep human need to understand moments that defy explanation. In many ways, they are the modern equivalent of the old tales our ancestors once shared around fires, messages delivered at the boundary between life and death, but now traveling through glowing screens and digital signals instead of dreams or visions. In this sense, the phenomenon occupies a unique space. It is rooted in technology, yet it feels older than the devices that carry it. These calls live at the crossroads where personal grief meets the limits of science, where memory interacts with emotion, and where coincidence brushes up against the possibility of something more. Researchers in psychology observe that humans are storytellers by nature. When faced with events that do not fit into our usual patterns, especially during times of emotional upheaval, we search for meaning. Sometimes that meaning comes from faith, sometimes from personal intuition, sometimes from a simple need for connection that refuses to end abruptly. This does not make the experience any less real. Instead, it shows how deeply we are shaped by the people we love, even after they are gone. At the same time, these stories have spread far beyond individual experiences. They appear in books, documentaries, forums, podcasts, and late-night conversations whispered between friends. Each retelling adds another thread to a growing tapestry, part folklore, part mystery, part emotional truth. Some people share these stories with a sense of comfort, believing them to be final goodbyes. Others approach them with curiosity, treating them as puzzles waiting to be solved. And some simply accept them as one more reminder that not everything in our world fits neatly into the frameworks we have built. Whether viewed symbolically, emotionally, or as literal unexplained events, these calls continue to resonate because they touch something universal, the deep human desire to stay connected, even for one last moment, across boundaries we do not fully understand. As we close today's journey, one thing becomes clear: these mysterious calls sit in that rare space where technology, memory, and emotion overlap. Some people see glitches, others see signs, and many simply hold on to the experience as a moment that felt real, even if it can't be explained by any system or record. Whether these calls come from network anomalies, the mind's deep response to loss, or some form of connection that reaches beyond what we currently understand, they remind us of something universal: that the bonds we share do not always end in the ways we expect. Thank you for spending your time with me exploring this strange and fascinating story. If you have ever felt a moment that did not fit into the usual rules of life, you are definitely not alone. And who knows, maybe these mysteries exist to remind us that the world is still full of hidden corners waiting to be explored. I will see you in the next chapter of our journey. Stay curious, stay open, and if you have ever experienced something mysterious yourself, feel free to share it below. Until next time, everyone, take care and good night.